My name is Dana Thorne, and this is the story of how a $10 inheritance became the fulcrum upon which my world and the empire of my family was irrevocably tilted. At 27, my identity was woven not from the threads of corporate lineage, but from the silver halides of the darkroom, the wild tangle of my wavy brown hair, and an artistic spirit that my relatives treated as a regrettable and, frankly, unprofitable genetic mutation. This is not merely a chronicle of wealth changing hands. It is a testament to how the coldest, most public humiliation can forge a resilience you never knew you possessed, how the deepest cut can carve the sharpest edge. It began, as so many endings do, in the suffocating grandeur of a house built on silence and secrets. The day was a bleak Tuesday in October, the kind where the sky over Fosdyke County is the color of old pewter. I drove my aging, paint-chipped hatchback through the gilded gates of Quadraton Manor, the opulent estate of my recently deceased uncle, Robert Vance. The house stood on its hill like a stone titan, its windows watching my approach with cold indifference. Inside, the air was a palpable entity, a heavy, cloying mixture of lemon polish, old leather, and the unspoken desperation of those who have gathered to feast on the dead. The rhythmic, melancholic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall was the only sound, each pendulum swing a metronome counting down to the division of spoils. My family, a parliament of vultures in bespoke suits and designer morning wear, had assembled. They were scattered across the grand library, a room of mahogany-lined walls and ancestral portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow my every move. Arthur Peterson, my uncle's lawyer for 40 years, stood by the massive stone fireplace. He was a man of 60, built of quiet integrity and starched collars, his face a mask of professional neutrality that betrayed nothing. His gaze swept over the avaricious faces before him, a silent, final appraisal. My aunt, Margaret Alcott, was the matriarch of this assembly of greed. At 58, her features were as sharp and unforgiving as the facets of the diamond necklace clasped around her throat. A sneer was already playing on her thin, perfectly painted lips, an expression of preemptive victory. Her son, my cousin Jason Albright, 35, was the heir apparent in his own mind. He lounged in a wingback chair, ostentatiously checking his gold Rolex, the picture of a man convinced that birthright was a synonym for merit. His sister, Heather, 32, was a more subtle predator. She sat poised and perfect, a porcelain doll of a woman, but her stillness was electric. A manicured nail tapped a relentless, silent rhythm against the arm of her chair, the only betrayal of the ferocious anticipation churning within her. And then there was me, the black sheep, the artistic anomaly who had traded a guaranteed seat on the Nymore conglomerate's corporate ladder for the chaotic, uncertain freedom of a photography career. I clutched a fragile shard of hope, a memory of Uncle Robert visiting my cramped, chemical-scented barkroom a year ago. He had looked at a black and white print of a lone, gnarled tree, its branches stark against a winter sky. "You don't just take pictures, Dana," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "You capture the soul of things others have forgotten to see." That memory was the flimsy life raft I clung to in this ocean of avarice. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the cathedral-like silence. He began to read the will, his voice a dry monotone that methodically dismantled Robert's empire and distributed its pieces. Lavish bequests went to Margaret, Jason, and Heather. They accepted them with smug, entitled nods. Finally, Mr. Peterson arrived at my name. "To my niece, Dana Thorne," he read, pausing for a fraction of a second that stretched into an eternity, "who has always insisted on marching to the beat of her own drummer, I leave the sum of $10. The silence didn't just break, it shattered. Margaret's laugh was the first sound, a shrill, cutting cackle that ripped through the air and echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Jason followed with a booming, derisive guffaw, slapping his thigh as if he'd heard the punchline to the world's greatest joke. Heather's was a delicate, tinkling titter, somehow more cruel and dismissive than the others.
The humiliation was a physical force. It washed over me as a wave of heat, starting in my chest and crawling up my neck, burning my cheeks. It was a public branding, a declaration of my worthlessness spelled out in the currency they understood best. In that moment, I wanted the polished marble floor to crack open and swallow me whole, to drag me down into the dark, away from their triumphant, mocking eyes. But as they reveled in my utter debasement, Mr. Peterson took a step toward me. He extended his hand, not for a handshake of condolence, but to offer a single, thick envelope. It was cream-colored, sealed with a disc of dark blue wax bearing the Vance family crest. Its cool, heavy weight in my trembling palm was an anchor, pulling me back from the brink of absolute despair. That letter changed everything. The library still echoed with the dying embers of their laughter as I retreated to a secluded corner by a large rain-streaked window. I could feel their gazes on my back, a mixture of pity and smug satisfaction. They assumed it was a letter of trite sentiment, a final, pathetic apology. Their noise, once so deafening, began to recede into a dull hum, replaced by the crisp rustle of the envelope as my fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, broke the wax seal. I unfolded the heavy parchment. My uncle's familiar, elegant script flowed across the page, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal type of the will. "My dearest Dana," it began, "if you are reading this, it means the first act of my final play has unfolded precisely as I intended. I must apologize for the momentary discomfort, my dear, but sometimes a bit of theatricality is required to reveal the true nature of one's audience." My eyes flickered up from the page. Margaret was dabbing a tear of mirth from her eye with a silk handkerchief. Jason was whispering to Heather, who covered her mouth to stifle another giggle. My public shaming was their private joke. A cold, hard knot of something new, not despair, but a terrible, dawning clarity formed in my stomach. This wasn't a punishment. It was a lens. I returned to the letter, my focus sharpening, devouring each word. Observe them, Dana. Look closely at their faces, their reactions to your supposed misfortune. This, my clever girl, is the raw, unvarnished truth of their regard for you and for everything I truly valued. For years, I watched them. Your Aunt Margaret, with her insatiable appetite for status and her disdain for anything not quantifiable in currency. I remember the Christmas she bemoaned that a diamond bracelet was merely 5 carats. Your cousin Jason, a peacock preening in borrowed feathers, who believes his birthright entitles him to rewrite reality. He once crashed a $250,000 sports car and expressed only annoyance that it would take a week to replace. And Heather, always lurking in the shadows, a viper waiting to strike at anyone who dares to shine brighter than her. They represent everything the Nimmore conglomerate, under their stewardship, would eventually become: hollow, soulless, driven by greed and appearance. You, my dear, were different. You saw the world with an artist's soul, capturing beauty where others saw only utility. Your photography spoke to me in a language their balance sheets never could. Do you recall those obscure online galleries where you sold your early pieces? The private commissions that seemed to come from nowhere. A buyer named A. Smith who paid for your print of the abandoned shipyard? That, my dear, was me, operating from the quiet solitude of my Bellevue Airy penthouse. I collected your vision, Dana, as diligently as I nurtured your spirit. I saw in you the potential for a different kind of legacy, one that transcended mere wealth. My breath caught in a strangled gasp. A. Smith. That sale had paid my rent for 3 months. I remembered the thrill, the anonymous validation that a stranger believed in my work that much. It hadn't been a stranger. It had been him all along. A wave of profound grief, sharp and fresh, washed over me for the loss of this remarkable, secretly supportive man. He hadn't just seen something special. He had actively, silently fostered it. This public will, the letter continued, the one Mr. Peterson just read, is merely a performance, a piece of strategic fiction to expose their avarice and to protect you from their immediate predatory grasp. While they are reveling in your paltry inheritance, Mr. Peterson holds the true document. It is an ironclad trust, meticulously crafted by the finest legal minds, that grants you the majority stake in the Nymore conglomerate, the entirety of my private art collection, which, as you now know, is largely your own work, and access to liquid assets and investments totaling in the hundreds of millions. It is yours, Dana, all of it. A platform, not just for personal wealth, but for a revolution of values within the very empire they covet. The words swam, then snapped into crystalline focus. Hundreds of millions, majority stake. The sheer, impossible scale of it crashed over me. From $10 to an empire. The brutal, poetic justice of it was almost overwhelming. My supposed worthlessness, declared so loudly moments ago, was the most brilliant misdirection imaginable. I have tasked Mr. Peterson with handling the official transfer of assets and ensuring your smooth transition into control. He is a man of impeccable integrity, privy to all my machinations for the last year. They will try to fight you, Dana. They will claw and scratch and use every dirty trick in their arsenal. Do not give them the satisfaction of seeing you flinch. This is not about revenge in the petty sense, but about reclaiming the soul of a legacy. Build something beautiful, Dana, something real, and know that even in my absence, my faith in you remains absolute. With profound belief and enduring love, your Uncle Robert Vance. I lowered the letter, my hand no longer trembling. A strange calm settled over me, displacing the humiliation with a fierce, icy determination. My gaze swept across the room to my relatives, who were now beginning to move, preparing to depart and celebrate their victory. I saw them now not as formidable titans, but as deluded puppets whose strings had just been cut. A smile, thin and sharp as a shard of glass, touched my lips for the first time that day. Mr. Peterson, who had been watching me with an unreadable expression, sensed the shift. He approached quietly. "Miss Thorne?" he inquired, his voice a low murmur. I met his gaze, my own now hardened with a new resolve. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I believe there's another document that requires your attention." A flicker of understanding, or perhaps satisfaction, crossed Mr. Peterson's face before being suppressed. "Indeed, there is," he confirmed. He turned back to face the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice now carrying a resonant authority that commanded their immediate, irritated attention. "If I may have a moment more of your time, there is a codicy to be addressed." "A codicy?" Margaret scoffed, turning back from the doorway. "Arthur, don't be tedious. We have arrangements to make." "This is more than a codicy, Mrs. Alcott," Peterson said. He walked back to his briefcase and extracted a second, much thicker document bound in dark blue leather. "We now proceed with the final and true last will and testament of Robert Vance." A ripple of confusion went through the room. "True will?" Jason blustered, stepping forward. "What is this charade? My uncle's mental faculties were clearly in decline if he was drafting multiple wills." "On the contrary, Mr. Albright," Peterson countered smoothly. "Mr. Vance's capacity was rigorously assessed and confirmed by multiple independent medical professionals at the time of this document, 3 months ago. This document, by its own explicit terms, supersedes and renders null and void any and all prior iterations." He paused, letting the legal weight of his words settle in the suddenly chilled air. Then he began to read. He didn't summarize. He read the cold, hard legal language. He detailed the vastness of the holdings,
the Nymore conglomerate and its subsidiaries, private real estate spanning continents, extensive investment portfolios in every major market, and the art collection. He then articulated the terms of the new trust, his voice a steady drone of destruction for the Albright family's hopes. Quote, placing the entirety of the controlling interest, all voting shares, and the bulk of Robert Vance's personal fortune squarely under the custodianship of a single trust, for which the sole beneficiary and designated trustee shall be his niece, Dana Thorne. The reaction was instantaneous and cataclysmic. Margaret's face, which had been a mask of contemptuous amusement, seemed to collapse. The color drained away, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed visage of disbelief. "Impossible!" she shrieked, the sound of ragged, hysterical tear in the fabric of the room. "This is an outrage, a forgery! He would never!" Jason, who had gone from smug to pale, now turned a shade of mottled red. He lunged forward, his hands clenched into fists as if he meant to physically wrest the document from Peterson's hands. "You can't be serious! This is a joke! Dana? The company? She'd run it into the ground in a week! This is our birthright! Mine!" Heather, usually so poised, looked as though she'd been struck by lightning. The sophisticated veneers shattered, revealing the raw, ugly envy beneath. Her eyes, wide with shock and incandescent fury, fixed on me. "Her photography?" she hissed, her voice a venomous rasp as Peterson detailed the transfer of the art collection. "That amateur nonsense he wasted money on? Robert was senile. This entire thing is a sham, engineered by a manipulative nobody." I stood there, a pillar of calm in the hurricane of their making. I watched their spectacular implosion, their disbelief giving way to fury, their fury curdling into abject terror. It was all the vindication I could ever need. This wasn't about the money, not primarily. It was about this moment. It was watching them be stripped bare of their pretense, exposed for the grasping, hollow people they were. Mr. Peterson, unfazed by their histrionics, concluded with a firm statement about the legal irrevocability of the will, mentioning the multiple attestations and ironclad clauses that foreclosed any easy challenge. The chaos that followed was glorious. Margaret threatened lawsuits, screaming about undue influence. Jason blustered about shareholder rights. Heather burst into bitter, ugly tears. As they descended into a chaotic, self-serving frenzy, trying to corner a stonewalling Peterson, I slipped out of the library and into the quiet solitude of the Manor's conservatory. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and an exhilarating lightness. "He truly was a master strategist," I murmured to the orchids, clutching the letter that felt like a scepter in my hand. He had not only given me a future, he had given me the truth. The days that followed were a crash course in power. Mr. Peterson became my Virgil, guiding me through the labyrinthine circles of the Nymore conglomerate. We spent long hours in a temporary office, poring over financial statements, corporate structures, and personnel files. My artist's eye, trained to see nuance in light and shadow, was now forced to find meaning in balance sheets and quarterly reports. My first official day at Nymore Tower was a trial by fire. The building itself was an imposing monolith of steel and glass, designed to communicate power and intimidate visitors. As I walked through the cavernous lobby, a sea of whispers and stares followed me. I was the ghost at the feast, the inexplicable anomaly who had usurped the throne. The first board meeting was a masterclass in passive aggression. The room was filled with allies of my family, men in their 60s who looked at me not as their new leader, but as a temporary inconvenience. A particularly stuffy gentleman named Mr. Harrington, a longtime friend of Margaret's, made his disdain clear. "With all due respect, Miss Thorne," he began, the words dripping with condescension, "your background is in the arts. We are facing significant headwinds in the Asian market. What precisely is your strategy for mitigating our exposure?" I met his gaze evenly. The Dana of a week ago would have shrunk under his dismissive tone. The new Dana, armed with my uncle's faith and days of cramming with Peterson, leaned forward. "My strategy, Mr. Harrington, is to see what you're missing," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You see a balance sheet liability. I see a subsidiary that lost its creative direction years ago. We're not going to liquidate. We are going to reinvest. We will find its soul again, rebrand, and empower the local leadership that you have been ignoring. True value isn't just cut from losses, it's grown from vision." The room was silent. I had not given them the answer they expected. I had given them the answer my uncle would have wanted. With Peterson's guidance, I identified the key players Uncle Robert had trusted, individuals who had been marginalized by my family's cronyism.
One was Evelyn Reed, a brilliant and fiercely loyal head of logistics whom Jason had repeatedly passed over for promotion. I made her my COO. Together, we began the slow, arduous process of steering the massive ship onto its new course. My first order of business wasn't about corporate restructuring. It was about laying the groundwork for the legacy my uncle had envisioned. I immediately began scouting locations for the Thrivecroft Gallery. I didn't want a sterile white cube in an upscale district. I wanted a space with history, with a soul. I found it in a revitalizing industrial section of the city, a sprawling, abandoned textile factory, its brick walls weathered, its immense floor-to-ceiling windows clouded with the grime of decades. It was perfect. I hired a team of visionary architects with the mandate to preserve the building's industrial character while transforming it into a modern, welcoming beacon for creativity. Simultaneously, I delved into the Nymore philanthropy. As I suspected, it was a superficial entity, designed for tax benefits and PR. Its donations were scattered and safe. I convened the board, Harrington and his ilk, and informed them of the new, singular mission. All resources would be redirected to support arts education in underserved communities and to provide substantial grants for independent artists. "Arts education?" Harrington scoffed. "Miss Thorne, surely the Foundation's resources are better utilized in more tangible areas. Infrastructure, medical research?" "Mr. Harrington," I countered, "creativity is the most tangible resource a society has. It's the engine of innovation, the foundation of critical thinking. We will invest in human potential. This is not charity. It is the most fundamental R&D a culture can undertake." The ensuing debates were heated, but my majority shares made the outcome inevitable. I methodically replaced the board with passionate advocates for the arts, educators, community leaders, and artists themselves. It felt like a cleansing, sweeping away the dust of complacency and replacing it with a vibrant, living purpose. As I built, my family tried to destroy. Margaret's lawsuits were a constant draining annoyance, but Peterson, anticipating every move, neutralized them with surgical precision. Jason's attempt to stage a shareholder revolt failed spectacularly, exposing him as incompetent and leaving him a laughingstock in the business community. Heather's campaign of social warfare backfired. Her gossip about the eccentric artist was drowned out by glowing press coverage of the innovative Thrivecroft Gallery and the transformative work of the new Nymore philanthropy. Months melted into a year. The Thrivecroft Gallery opened to national acclaim. Its first exhibition featured an unknown sculptor from a low-income neighborhood. Critics hailed her as a major new voice, and every piece sold. The Nymore philanthropy funded a mobile art studio that brought painting and photography to rural communities that had never had them. The Nymore conglomerate, under the leadership of myself and Evelyn Reed, was slowly but surely evolving, its stock price climbing on the back of a new reputation for innovation and corporate responsibility. My family's decline was a quiet, slow-motion collapse. Margaret, defeated in court, became a social pariah, her invitations drying up, her influence evaporating. Jason's own business ventures, launched with what little capital he had left, crashed and burned, leaving him in debt and disgrace. In a final, desperate act, he called me, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance, asking for a loan. I listened silently before saying, "No, Jason," and hanging up.
Heather, stripped of her social superiority and financial cushion, withered. She was forced to sell her sprawling Fosdyke County home. The last I heard, she was living in a modest condo, her bitterness her only remaining companion. One quiet afternoon, I found myself in my personal studio, the one I had maintained as my sanctuary. The comforting smell of darkroom chemicals still hung in the air. I picked up a small, unassuming frame from my desk. Inside it was the $10 check from the Quadirta National Bank, endorsed and cashed, the instrument of my public humiliation. I remembered the searing sting of that moment, the desire to simply cease to exist. Now, looking at it, I felt a different kind of burn, a quiet, steady warmth of triumph. It was never about the money. It was about what that $10 represented. It was the moment of greatest rejection that had, paradoxically, opened the door to my truest freedom. It was my uncle's brilliant, cruel, and ultimately kindest joke, the one that had allowed me to see the world and my family for exactly what they were. And it was the beginning of everything else. The check wasn't a reminder of my worthlessness. It was a testament to my worth, a proof of purchase for a life I had built not from the ashes of my old one, but from the foundation of a love I hadn't even known was there. It was my North Star, a tiny piece of paper that held more meaning than all the billions, a quiet monument to a legacy reclaimed and a justice so perfectly rendered it could only be called poetic.